Welcome to another episode of the MMA Lockcast. I'm your host, Manpreet, aka MMA Lock of the Night, and your boy on social media at MMALOTN. Normally, I'd plug the MMA Fight Archive in here for you guys, but not really feeling it. Regardless, make sure you guys check it out. Obviously, for the Contender series, it's going to be very helpful for you as we are going into our second week on Tuesday. And again, if you don't know what to expect from these fighters, the MMA Fight Archive will surely help you as we have as many direct links as possible behind it so that you can go out there and know exactly what to expect, whether you're trying to just analyze it or bet it, whatever it is. The MMA Fight Archive 7-day free trial as well. Check the link in the description below. I said I wasn't going to plug it, but I still ended up plugging it, so it is what it is. Make sure you guys take advantage of that. Secondly, shout out to all you guys in terms of hitting that subscribe button. We are 10 subscribers away from 9,000 subscribers, and I said at the beginning of the Contender series, my goal was to reach that 10,000 mark originally by the ending of the year, but I'm hoping we can get it done by the ending of this season's Contender series. So if you are a regular viewer of this podcast or you're just stumbling in for the first time, help your boy achieve some of these milestones in his career by hitting that subscribe button. And let's see if we can get to that 10,000 mark before the middle of October. You know, my birthday is October 22nd. I'm hoping that we can actually you guys can give me that birthday gift in terms of reaching that 10,000 subscriber mark by then. So if you haven't already, make sure you guys hit that subscribe. All right. This week, we're talking about UFC Shanghai, which is headlined by a light heavyweight affair between Johnny Walker and rising Chinese contender Mingyang Zhang, who's been on an absolute wrecking streak, most recently retiring Anthony Smith in bloody fashion, and now he hopes to continue working his way up the rankings by adding the scalp of Johnny Walker to his resume. In the co-main event, we got a 5-round featherweight matchup here between Brian Ortega and former bantamweight champion Aljamain Sterling, who's looking to build back from that loss that he suffered to Movsar Evloev. I believe that was either back in December or January, but looking to go 2-1 now in the featherweight division after that one win he had over Calvin Kattar last year. This is the type of card you would expect to take place in Shanghai with the amount of Asian prospects that we have on there. And there are some bangers as well. So some fun fights all throughout. A lot of good money line spots that we could be tackling. Obviously, I just finished my research for this, plugged in a few of those spots as track plays, which I've posted on the Lock of the Night Patreon page. So you guys can check that out if you like. Otherwise, just try to decipher it through the 12 breakdowns that I'm going to be giving to you guys right now in terms of which spots I ended up shooting on. Let's do a quick recap of this past weekend's UFC 319 card in terms of our Lock of the Night and Dog of the Night plays. The Lock of the Night play, I must shamelessly say, was Aaron Pico. I got him around that minus 170 mark. He looked good until he didn't. And that when he didn't was when Lerone Murphy decided to spin into a nasty spinning back elbow and land it perfectly on the dome of Pico to put his lights clean out. But for the most part, I expected the fight to go that way with Pico constantly pressuring, landing big shots. It seems like he hurt Murphy a few times as well, even those shots that he landed to the body. And then he was able to land a few takedowns, get a bit of control time, let Murphy back to his feet. And then he was trying to rinse and repeat that. But it seemed like he was just a little bit too lackadaisical with that aggression. And that eventually led to Murphy landing that spinning back elbow. And again, Murphy, not known to be a guy to be much of a finisher. I think up until that point, he had only had 2 finishes in the UFC. He was on a bit of a streak of decisions as well. But again, he utilized the aggression of Pico against him, and he came out with a big knockout, which probably sets him up for a title shot as well. So I don't regret playing Pico. I think what I regret the most is kind of making him a Lock of the Night play. I think that level of confidence was a little bit over exaggerated. It probably was. I felt good with playing him, but maybe I should have tempered my expectations a little bit. In a hindsight, I think Michael Page probably was the best spot there in terms of the fighters that I had confidence in, that I shot on. I had a decent bet on Michael Page as well, but he probably should have ended up being the Lock of the Night. Even with that tumultuous third round he had against Jared Cannonier, he did good enough work in those first 2 rounds to showcase that he, was going to win that fight regardless. But But Pico fumbles the bag. I'll take that L on the chin. I know there's a lot of you screaming in the comment section that Murphy should obviously be the play. Maybe not a lock of the night play, but should have been the prediction in that fight. And one other thing I want to address, a lot of people are saying, hey, you got to stop picking Bellator veterans. To be clear, I picked against and cashed against Patchy Mix in his debut against Mario Bautista. I picked against and cashed against Patricio Pitbull in his debut when he took on Yair Rodriguez. But, then there's Michael Page, who I picked and bet on when he made his debut against Kevin Holland, and it worked out. And it's worked out every time I bet on him or against him in that one fight that he had against Ian Machado Gary. So, again, it's all about styles. Just because guys are coming over from Bellator, they're given that bad name for whatever it is. Obviously, the three guys stumbling this year, but that's not the be-all, end-all. It's all about the stylistic matchup ahead of them. So, again, credit to all the Murphy backers out there. Again, I'll eat the loss on the chin there. It is what it is. He looked good until he didn't, but that's the mixed martial arts game. That's the volatility of MMA in a nutshell. There is that matchup in particular. So, again, credit the Murphy backers there. We did take an L on our, I can't recall what the other lock of the night play was for another card. I think it was on the PFL. I can't recall off the top of my head who it was, but we go 0-2 on the weekend on lock of the night plays. We go 41-27 on the year now for a 60% hit rate. Still roughly in the black now because of these two back-to-back lock of the night losses. We'll try to get back on track this week. Dog of the night play did pretty well. We went 2-1 over the weekend with the UFC's dog of the night play being Jakar Close. That fight pretty much closed as a pick'em, so great job for us for actually getting him around that plus 145 line. Very happy with that. He went out there, stayed safe enough, stayed away from the danger of Barboza, and then grinded that fight out the way that I thought he would. And that now increases our dog of the night record to 38-46 on the year for a 45% hit rate. All right. This weekend, there's a ton of MMA action going down actually, and I have breakdowns for pretty much all of them, well, most of them. We got Contender Series obviously going down on Tuesday. That full card breakdown is already on the YouTube page, so make sure you guys check that out. The final PFL tournament event is on Thursday. I'll have breakdowns for that for you guys. Hopefully, it's probably going to be Wednesday, maybe Tuesday night, maybe Wednesday. Not really sure exactly when I'll drop that, but I will have breakdowns for you guys there. Road to UFC, I will not be breaking down on the YouTube page. That will strictly be a lock of the night Patreon page breakdown. So if you want access to that, check out the MMALOTN Patreon page. LFA 215 goes down on Friday. I'll have breakdowns on the YouTube page on Thursday, so stay tuned for that. And then obviously the Shanghai card breaking down for you guys right now. But reminder, since they are taking place in Shanghai, as well as that Road to UFC card, it is a much earlier start time. So Road to UFC actually kicks off Friday morning at 5 a.m. or 4 a.m. I'm thinking about my time zone. Let's say 6 a.m. Eastern time. And then the UFC Shanghai card kicks off Saturday morning at 3 a.m. Eastern time. So if you want to pull an all-nighter or sleep early and wake up early, it's up to you guys. But that's when those cards are. All right, that was a pretty lengthy intro, so I appreciate you guys if you sat through the recap and all the plugs and all that stuff. You guys are the real ones. You guys are the real MVPs. So without further ado, let's get right into this 12-fight card for UFC Shanghai, which kicks off in the light heavyweight division as we have Satybaldiev coming in at minus 160, going up against Nurgozhay, who comes in at plus 140. Now, Satybaldiev made his UFC debut on short notice. I believe that was back in April when he went up against Martin Budai, and that was a fight where we saw some of the recklessness work against him, which had made him so successful on the regional scene. He put together a 9-0 record, came over to LFA, had 2 title fights, won both of those, but he looked very sloppy in some of them, especially when he got taken down and held on his back. It didn't really seem like he had many answers in terms of working back to his feet. Even when he's the one in command in terms of getting takedowns, he has some decent top control, but he's not all that good in terms of just establishing it and grinding guys out for an entire round. He's looking to posture up and land big shots, but that often leaves him vulnerable to either being reversed or opponents working back to their feet. What he does best is when he walks opponents down lands his aggressive power striking approach and looks to get these guys out of there quickly with the power that he has in his hands. But again, there's a lot of repetitiveness in his game, which is why a guy like Martin Buday was able to counter his aggressive striking approach. And that's where we saw Buday land some counter shots, clinch up with him, push him against the cage, and eat some time off the clock there as well. Again, Satybaldiev is a fun fighter. He's an entertaining fighter. He's a reckless fighter. And that's going to come back to bite him in the ass as he takes steps up in competition in the UFC. He'll obviously have a full training camp this time around rather than the abbreviated one that he had in his debut. And also this fight will actually be at his legitimate weight class at light heavyweight rather than being at a near 60-pound discrepancy like he was against Martin Buday last time. Now he's going up against Dr. Nurgozhay, who laid an egg in his UFC debut, also suffering his first pro loss as he was beaten to the punch by Johhson. Ribeiro eventually submitted in the second round after landing a takedown. But there's a lot of weirdness going into that matchup, not to mention that he missed weight. So that's a big kind of a red flag there that he missed weight going into that fight. And then when he went into the fight, struck a little bit longer than he should have. And I think that allowed Ribeiro to start breaking Nurgozhay. And then where Nurgozhay got the fight to the ground in the second round, he didn't really have as much gas in his tank to try to hold Ribeiro down. Hence why he ended up giving that Kimura. Again, historically speaking, through his first 10 fights, very good cardio, very good wrestling, educated striking. We saw that on display when he got his Contender Series opportunity and he was able to knock out his opponent in the second round with a nasty head kick. So he's a good fighter. So I think there must have been something going on going into that last matchup against Ribeiro, and I believe that the public is overreacting to it and making him that plus 140 dog in this fight, but also kind of writing him off and say, hey, this guy sucks. You got to take a macro view of these fighters rather than just honing in on that one performance where they kind of fumbled the bag. In this matchup, if Nurgozhay is that fighter that I think he is, the guy that deservedly so should have been minus 250, minus 300 against Ribeiro, this is a fight where he'll look to take this to the ground and really stay away from that striking danger that Satybaldiev presents. Even in the striking realm, I think Nurgozhay can counter him effectively, maybe wrap him up against the cage like Buday did, but I think for him to have his best success, he would need to take Satybaldiev down. And like I said, Satybaldiev does not have a game off of his back. He has no jiu-jitsu off of his back, has very little options in working back to his feet, especially when he starts slowing down. Maybe early in fights, he can kind of just explode out of these bad spots, but as fights go longer, obviously that gets harder to do with the gas tank start to be diminished. So I'm going to give Nurgozhay the benefit of the doubt. I'm going to say that it was just a blip on the radar in terms of that bad performance that he had against Ribeiro, and I think we'll see him actually have a legitimate performance here against Satybaldiev, leading to Nurgozhay winning this fight on the scorecards. All right, next up, in the bantamweight division, we got Xiao Long coming in at plus 115, going up against Su Young Yu, who comes in at minus 135. Now, I think we saw the best version of Long last time around when he went up against Kwang Lee, where he was able to dictate the pace in the striking realm, hurt Kwang badly throughout that fight, until he eventually finished him in that third round. That might have been one of the best versions we've ever seen of Long, considering the success that he had in the striking realm. He was able to force Lee to strike in the pocket with him longer than Lee should have, which led to Long constantly hurting him and beating him up, battering him on the feet. His takedown defense has significantly improved throughout his career. Obviously, we saw that on the road to UFC when he went up against Shohei Nose and even Shuya Kamikubo, who are both very strong grapplers. He went, takedown for takedown, control for control with Chang Ho Lee in the road to UFC finale. That fight probably could have gone either way. You can flip a coin there, really. But obviously, the UFC saw that Long was worthy of being in the UFC, so they signed him anyway, and he obviously came through for them in that Kwang Lee debut. Very good striker, 36 fights of experience, and he's only 27 years old. That's absolutely crazy, and it seems like he's getting better every single time out. Now, he's going up against one of my favorite Korean prospects here in Jiu-Jitsu, Su Young Yu, who earned his contract as well through the road to UFC, was able to defeat Bergang Jilisi, where he had to utilize his entire arsenal of skills. Normally likes to take opponents to the ground and utilize a slick BJJ game to try to get the better of his opponents, find submissions, or get control time. But we also saw him utilize a, educated striking game. Nothing super dangerous, but just efficient enough. Good calf kicks, constant calf kicks, good 1-2s down the pipe. He's really starting to get that confidence in his hands. I'm very surprised that he was unable to finish AJ Cunningham last time, but I think a lot of that had to do with him striking a little bit more than I believe he should have. And then we saw him get right to the jiu-jitsu in the third round, but I think he had just expended too much energy by them to try to push for a finish late in that fight. But he dominated it pretty much the entire way, won 30-27, I believe, all around. He may have even got a 10-8 in that final round on one scorecard, if I remember correctly. But again, very fun fighter, just needs to continue improving that striking game. Now here against Xiao Long, we'll see Yu's striking definitely get tested. I think Long will showcase good enough wrestling defense to keep this fight upright, and then it's going to come down to how effective Yu can be with his calf kicks, or at least putting combinations together. Because it's clear that Long is going to be the one that's engaging in those pocket exchanges, and I think he has more firepower, more output, and more confidence in his hands, which will allow him to hit and hurt you more often than not in this fight. It hurts me to pick against one of my favorite fighters, but I feel like this is a solid matchup for Long to really touch you up, shut down the grappling, and it could possibly even lead to a knockout for Xiao. You can get that line currently at plus 650. I'm sure if FanDuel releases it later this week, you might be able to get 750 or 800. But even at this underdog price, I think this is a solid spot for the Chinese fighter to show out in front of his home country. And I think he comes through with a knockout here over Su Young-yu. All right, next up in the featherweight division, we got Yizha coming in at minus 1,200, going up against Weston Wilson, who comes in at plus 700. Now, starting off on the Yizha side of things, he came up short in his official UFC debut last time around against Gabriel Santos, and that was a fight where we saw his striking shortcomings really come back to haunt him. Now, Yizha is normally a guy that looks to implement his wrestling and his top pressure, whether that's either to set up submissions, ground and pound, or even grind fights out to get to the scorecards. He also has a decent jiu-jitsu game, which he showcased against Kai Wen Lee in his contract-winning performance on the road to UFC. But his striking, the way that he tries to make up for some of the technical deficiencies in his striking game is by applying a lot of pressure and aggression, hoping to make up for it just by keeping his opponents in uncomfortable positions. But that didn't work out that well against Gabriel Santos, who hurt him early and often, and even got the better of the grappling realm against Yizha later on in that matchup because he had broken Yizha so well through the first half of that fight. I don't think Yizha is bad by any means. He's 30 fights into his career, 25-5. You don't just stumble into that type of record without actually having some good skills. And I think he'll be able to show it against a certain level inside the UFC. And luckily, the UFC has given him a big enough step down in competition in his second fight that he can show off those skills that he has. Now, quickly glossing over Weston Wilson plus 700, coming off probably which will only be his lone UFC victory, where he got that submission victory over Jekka Sergi last time. That was a fight where he knew he needed to stay away from the power of Sergi, get that fight to the ground ASAP. He did. He pulled guillotine, was unsuccessful with it, then eventually threw up that arm triangle, that triangle choke, which in tune allowed him to get that arm bar as well, and that's how he forced a tap from Sergey. But again, that was a fight between the two lowest level fighters on the entire roster, in my opinion, right? Weston Wilson is a very, 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 very poor man's version of Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. I believe they train out of the same gym. Weston Wilson has that karate style of striking. He has a BJJ brown belt where he often looks to take opponents to the ground and apply that submission game quickly. If he can't get his opponents out of there quickly, he often ends up folding under the pressure and either getting knocked out or submitted himself. And I expect that to be the case here against Yizha. I'm not so hot on the minus 1,200. Obviously, no matter who it is, it's tough to get behind, minus 4x favorites. But Yizha, should be able to get this done within a round and a half, and I see that under 1.5 sitting around that minus 170 line. I fully expect Yizha to break Wilson down with aggression and pace. I think he eventually takes this fight to the ground, fights off a few submission attempts that might come from Wilson, and then eventually get the back of Wilson, sink in a rear naked choke, and I think he gets him out of there quickly. So maybe round one Yizha by sub, but even the under 1.5 is worth that little bit of chalk compared to taking that minus 1200. I'd be surprised if Weston Wilson survives that first round. So give me Yizha by round one submission. All right, next up in the middleweight division, we got Michel Pereira coming in at minus 260, going up against the returning Kyle Daukaus, who comes in at plus 220. Now, starting off on Michel Pereira, who finds himself on a 2-fight losing streak, is coming off one of the most puzzling performances we've ever seen from him. Now, if you look at the UFC stats, you wouldn't be able to tell. But if you watch the fight itself, you'd be surprised to see how, gun-shy, how muzzled Pereira looked. We're so used to seeing him throw big, explosive shots and really hurt his opponents and try to put the pressure on him that way. And even the commentators were talking about it, saying like, hey, this guy does not look like himself at all. And I don't know if that's just a trickle down of that beatdown that he suffered at the hands of Anthony Fluffy Hernandez, similar to what we saw with Francis Ngannou when he took on Derek Lewis after getting beat down by Stipe Miocic. Maybe that's what it is. Who knows? But he's really got to get it in check if he wants to avoid his first ever 3-fight losing streak. I believe it's going to be his first 3-fight losing streak if he loses this weekend. But I'm hoping somebody showed him that fight and said, hey, like, what the fuck is wrong with you, man? Like, you are so much better than this. You are way more explosive, way more dangerous, way more aggressive. Yet you look like a turtle of yourself, a shell of yourself. If he finds that entertaining, explosive, power-striking style of him once again this weekend, we could see a return to form for Pereira because he has a very winnable matchup here against returning Kyle Daukaus, a.k.a. the Darce Knight. Now, the reason he has that nickname, I believe... 7 of his 11 submission wins have come by Darce, including that win that he had over, I believe, Sean Connor Fallon to defend his CFFC title. This is a guy that got cut from the UFC back at the ending of 2022, has put together 4 straight victories, I believe, all under the CFFC banner. That included winning the CFFC title and defending it twice. But there are still some of those issues in his game that have haunted him in the UFC that are still prevalent even during this 4-fight winning streak. Most notably, when he gets hit, he doesn't react the best, right? Often you see him falling to his back or just getting wobbled. Obviously, against the level of opponent he was going up against on the regional scene, he was able to bounce back from those spots and get back to his game, either finding the submission or getting the win regardless. Last time around against Keenan Pattershuk, he landed a big shot to hurt Pattershuk, and he was able to get the TKO finish about a minute and a half into that fight. But I still think those issues, especially in the striking realm that haunt Daukaus, will haunt him in the UFC depending on who they put him up against. And this weekend, putting him up against a power puncher like Pereira, if there was ever a fight for Pereira to get his confidence back and showcase that he can still be that Demolidor style that he brings to the table, this is the fight. He lands one big shot on Daukaus, he more than likely gets him out of there. But at minus 260, me also maybe having some PTSD from that last performance. I don't want to trust him at this number. Maybe looking at that KO line, if it's good enough, that might be worth a little bit of a stab. But I think Pereira wins. I think he finds a knockout. I think he gets the big shot off here on Daukaus, but we need to see him come into form before we can trust him at chalk again. So I'm going to go Pereira by knockout. I don't hate anybody looking to take a shot on Daukaus, looking to take advantage of that poor showing that we saw from Pereira last time around. But again, similar to what I said about the DR Nurgozhay fight, take a macro look at this fight rather than a micro. Don't look so closely to that Magomedov loss, and assume that's the Pereira we're going to get from now on. But again, he's at chalk too, so you want to be a little bit skeptical, a little bit. But again, not so much to the point that you're going out there and betting the Daukaus side. But if anybody does, good luck to you. I'm still going to go Pereira and Pereira by knockout. All right, next up in the lightweight division, we got Rongzhu coming in at minus 260, or sorry, minus 270, going up against Austin Hubbard, who comes in at plus 230. Now, Rongzhu is coming off of an upset victory over the previously undefeated Cody Steele, where he dropped him numerous times in that matchup and won it on the scorecards. And I was happy to cash an underdog ticket that night, especially against a guy that I think very highly of in Cody Steele. I think that kid still has a ton of potential and some room to grow in the UFC, but being at such a significant experience disadvantage in that night against a power puncher like Rongzhu, who had clearly improved his defensive grappling enough during his time away from the UFC, it was a no-brainer spot to take a shot on him that night, and I'm glad that I did and was able to cash on that fight. Rongzhu at his best, very solid striker, throws big thudding shots. His takedown defense has improved significantly, which allows him to keep fights upright and really chop down his opponents, looking for those finishes, drawing out bad takedown attempts so he can slap on some submissions. But I think he's much better now than when he first came into the UFC, where he went, I believe, 1-2 with the promotion. Then he eventually got cut, but I don't think it was just because of the record. It was also because of back-to-back weight misses, which obviously the UFC doesn't think too highly of. So I'm happy that he got back to the regional scene, got to the road to UFC, had dominant performances all the way. In his fight against Chris Padilla, it seemed like momentum was kind of shifting his way until he got hit with that nasty elbow that busted up his eye and forced a stoppage. But I'd love to see that fight eventually be run back. I highly doubt it would, but I think that Rongzhu could come out successful in that matchup. But I think we are seeing him slowly come into his prime, especially with him only at 25 years old. Now he's going up against Austin Hubbard, who's now 1-3 in his last 4 fights, riding a 2-fight losing streak. Both of those losses coming by split decision. And, last time around, I trusted him as an underdog against Markel Medeiros. I thought he could implement his wrestling enough to really nullify Medeiros. I believe he was successful with it in the first round, couldn't really get to it in the second round, got to it early in the third round, but eventually got a position reversed, I think late in that matchup with maybe a minute or so left in that fight, and then Medeiros was able to rain down big shots and snatch the momentum of that fight back, and I think that's why 2 judges ended up scoring that fight for Medeiros. It was hard to argue it considering the lack of damage Hubbard implemented in that third round, and it seems like that's where his cardio starts to catch up with him, is when he's trying to implement such a heavy striking or a grappling game, and he's unable to really manage his gas tank while he struggles to hold these guys down. Decent striker, his nickname Thud obviously comes from when somebody heard him kicking a heavy bag and the thud sound that it used to make, so they gave that name to him. But again, I think he's starting to showcase where his ceiling is. If he can't get to his wrestling, if he can't find positions to stay safe enough in, he will get banged on. And I think that's what's going to happen here against Rongzhu. Look for Rongzhu to stop the takedowns, counter Hubbard effectively. I think he'll showcase a speed advantage as well. And I think that will lead to a very dominant victory here for Rongzhu, which I think could actually end in a knockout as well. So I'm going to go with the Chinese fighter here to land those big shots on Hubbard, and I think he probably finishes him in the second or third round. All right, next up in the flyweight division, we got high-level prospect here, undefeated prospect, Lonnie Kavanagh coming in at minus 180, going up against Charles Johhson, who comes in at plus 155. Now, last time around for Lonnie, Kavanagh took on a Felipe dos Santos in a fight where we had to see Kavanagh dig deeper into his bag of tricks more than we've seen him had to before. In previous fights, he leaned mainly on his striking, utilizing his speed, timing, and accuracy to butcher his opponents and find knockouts or outstrike them en route to decision victories. But we saw him get bonked a little bit early by Dos Santos and bloodied up as well, which eventually turned Kavanagh into a grappler, which he did successfully in the second and third rounds to win that fight on the scorecards, kind of reversing the momentum that Dos Santos had in that first round. That was great work from Kavanagh. At 26 years old, with a ton of hype, a ton of potential put on him, he goes to show that he can, battle back from adversity and still find success. His chain wrestling looked good. His top control looked great. He scrambled very well. Even when Dos Santos worked back to his feet, he was able to get him down pretty quickly. So it's good to see Kavanagh have to, change things up if he needs to really have success throughout his career. Again, 26 years old. He's training at a Great Britain top team headed by Brad Pickett, who's obviously a high-level coach producing high-level prospects. I think Kavanagh even sits at the top of that class there for Brad Pickett, and one of the fighters that he's most proud about as well. Now, talking about Charles Johhson, who had a very rough 4-fight losing streak, I believe it was 3 or 4-fight losing streak back in 2022. I can't recall the exact years here, but he was able to battle back from that, got a 4-fight winning streak in 2024. Very fun and dominant performances against Azat Maxim, Jake Hadley, even knocked out Joshua Van, who's actually going to be fighting for the title probably later this year, and then obviously that Sumudaerji victory as well. Unfortunately, the UFC didn't really give him much respect and actually put him up against a UFC newcomer, 18-2 Ramazan Tamirov. And that was a fight where Johhson had a ton of issues trying to deal with the speed, power, and explosivity of Tamirov in those first 2 rounds. It was clear that Tamirov had punched himself out in that 3rd round, and that's where Johhson was able to have success. But unfortunately, it was too little too late, and he was unable to get the decision that night. And that obviously set Johhson back a little bit after having that 4-fight winning streak snapped. I believe it came out also that Tamirov popped for banned substances, so it makes it even worse that Johhson was coming off that loss now against a guy that, I don't know if they're going to overchange the result. They haven't yet, so I doubt they will. But very unfortunate for Johhson to have his winning streak snapped by a guy that was on the sauce. Now in this matchup, he's going to look to play spoiler against Kavanagh, who, trains out of England, but I believe he was born in China, or one of his parents, maybe both of his parents were from China, and that's why he reps China and wants to fight on these cards whenever he can. I believe he fought his UFC debut in Macau against Jose Ochoa in November in China, in Macau, and I think that's why he wanted to be on this card. I think the speed advantage of Kavanagh and the power advantage of Kavanagh will likely get him the victory here. Johhson may have an advantage in output and volume, but I think Kavanagh's ability to mix his power with his grappling as well could cause Johhson some issues. I don't think Kavanagh will control Johhson on the ground as easily as he did with Dos Santos in the last 2 rounds of that fight, but he'll be able to mix in enough control, maybe a minute here, a minute there, and then the threat of the takedown might end up muzzling the offense of Johhson as well. So normally we see Kavanagh at chalk, and I think people are starting to understand, okay, maybe he shouldn't always be chalk. The Dos Santos fight was probably a marker for that, but also Johhson obviously a very tough out, a veteran as well, has a ton of experience against a ton of different guys in the flyweight division. But I still think that Kavanagh is deserving of being this favorite. I think he has the tools to do it against Johhson here, and I think we end up seeing Kavanagh grind this fight out, mixing the martial arts well, putting together a good body of work, and winning this fight on the scorecards. All right. Lightweight division now, where we have Maheshate coming in at plus 110, going up against Gage Young, who comes in at minus 130. I'll start off on the Maheshate side of things, who is now 1-3 over his last 4 fights. That one win being over Gabriel Benitez, which was by split decision. A fight that ended up being closer than a lot of people thought it should have been. But, that just maybe goes to show that we're rating Maheshate a little bit higher than we should be. Last time around, he got swept on the scorecards by Nicholas Mota while being threatened by being finished that entire time. Mota dropped him numerous times in that matchup, nearly finishing him in the first and third rounds. And Maheshate had no answer for it. Normally we see him utilizing good striking, good range management. At 6 foot with a 71-inch reach, he's usually the longer, taller guy, and that allows him to pick opponents apart from distance and utilize his power, just as he showcased in his biggest UFC win, which was over Steve Garcia, who's obviously streaking ever since that loss. But guys like Rafa Garcia, Vyacheslav Borshev, Nicholas Mota, even Gabriel Benitez had some solid success against him, showcasing that he has some issues in his technical striking defense, and that's where better strikers are able to get the better of him, hurt him repeatedly, and sometimes maybe even get him out of there. He's going up against a tough test here in Gage Young, who came up short in his short notice UFC debut against Evan Elder a few months back. And that was a tough fight. He kind of struggled to get into his rhythm. Anytime he was starting to get into a bit of a groove, Evan Elder was able to land a few big power combinations, and that kind of interrupted and deterred Young's groove and flow state. But I think that was a good learning lesson for Young. I think we'll see him come back, maybe throw a little bit more sauce on his shots as well. He has a great jab, stays very consistent with it, landing it down the pipe, good crosses as well, great body work, rip into the body of his opponents, and obviously his defensive grappling has improved at a stellar rate, which allows him to keep fights in the striking realm. I believe he shut down all 3 of the takedown attempts that came from Evan Elder, who's usually a very strong grappler and very physical as well, but Young showcased very good defense that night. Now, this matchup against Maheshate, I think it favors Young, obviously, as the odds obviously indicate here. But I think this is a great matchup for Young to go out there and show his technical striking advantage over Maheshate. Young also has very good durability, so I'd be surprised if Maheshate puts him away. But I think that will see Young stay consistent, stay aggressive, counter effectively. I think he might be the slightly faster fighter as well, and I think that will likely get him to the target a little bit quicker than Maheshate, especially on those counters, and I think that could eventually produce a knockout here for Gage Young. I get he's flying across the world for this matchup, but I think that, 25 years old, getting closer and closer to his prime, seeing how hittable Maheshate has been as of late, I think this is a very winnable matchup for Gage Young, and I think he'll produce a knockout here. So look for Young, go to war early, and then really start to run away with this and produce a second or third round finish. Next up in the welterweight division, we got Tailak Nueraji making his UFC debut, coming in at minus 500, taking on Kiefer Crosbie, who comes in at plus 375. Now, starting off on the Nueraji side of things, who had a very dominant and highlight reel performance against Hansul Kim on the road to UFC back in 2023. Unfortunately, that wasn't enough for him to get the contract at that point. He did go back to the regional scene, pull off 3 straight first-round finishes, and now gets his opportunity on the UFC roster. And I think it's a great addition. The guy's very fun to watch, very aggressive, does a great job in terms of putting pressure on his opponents, putting big shots together and trying to get them out of there. I've just had some issues with the striking defense at times, and some guys have been able to clip him, but his youth probably helps his durability, which is why he only has 1 loss, and that 1 loss came against a guy that had way more experience than him. He was only 20 years old at the time. The guy had almost 30 more fights than him. Meng Ding, I believe he actually competed on the Contender series within the last few years, if I'm not mistaken. But Nueraji hit him with all the best shots that he could in the first half of that fight, and then once he saw that Ding was not going anywhere, it seemed like his morale started to get hurt, and he started to slow down a little bit, and that's where Ding just really started to pick it up. And then he eventually landed a liver kick that put Nueraji down. Earlier, I couldn't find the fight, but I eventually found the tape, obviously posted on the Fight Archive, so if you want to check it out, you can check it out there. But again, you see where his striking defense has kind of failed him, where guys can really counter those 1-2s down the middle because he keeps his chin so far up in the air. And that's the issue that I have in his game. Like, he's fun to watch. He's very good. There's a reason I believe all of his fights have finished inside the distance. I believe he's finished all of his opponents in the first round, if I'm not mistaken. 10 of his 11 wins have come by knockout, while the other one came by submission, which was 2 fights ago where he got an armbar victory. But still young. Still has a lot of experience to accrue, but it's clear that he loves to throw down, loves to throw big power, and try to knock his opponents out. Now, he's going up against Kiefer Crosbie, who is one of the more puzzling signings to the UFC, similar to Weston Wilson earlier, who I spoke about earlier on the card. Maybe not as bad as Weston Wilson, because at least Kiefer Crosbie has a win over a former UFC fighter and Alex Cowboy Oliveira. But then he's been submitted in back-to-back first rounds against Kevin Johhson and Sam Patterson so far. And now he's coming in as a plus 375 against, a highly touted Chinese prospect. It almost seems like he's just been coming in to do the job for a lot of these guys, which is very unfortunate. But again, he's a power puncher, throws with a lot of heat, wide winging hooks, very bad grappling game, hence why he's been submitted in pretty much all of his losses or most of his losses. There's a reason why guys look to get fights to the ground against him very quickly, because they know they can get the better of him there. But on the feet is where he is most dangerous, where he can throw those big shots and try to hurt his opponents and try to get them out that way. Now, in this matchup against Nueraji, that might work out. He might be able to land some big shots here against Nueraji, but he'll have, a 6-inch reach advantage to overcome. I believe it's roughly about a 3-inch height advantage for Nueraji as well. But given the chin up in the air defense from Nueraji. It would not surprise me at all if Crosbie was able to land that big shot and try to get him out there that way. I think Nueraji would be best fit to drag this fight to the ground ASAP and take advantage of the defensive grappling issues in Crosbie's game, but that's not what Nueraji normally does. He looks to just strike with guys and try to knock their head clean off. So I would not take the minus 500. I'd rather take the under 1.5. I expect this to be a car crash. I expect it to be Nueraji who ends up getting his hand raised here, but you can't overlook the power that Crosbie has and some of the defensive striking issues in Nueraji's game that Crosbie might be able to take advantage of. But I'm going to go Nueraji, round 1 KO. All right. Fun flyweight battle here between two strikers up next as we have Sumudaerji coming in at minus 155 going up against Kevin Borjas, who comes in at plus 135. Now, Mudaerji, very tough stretch recently, 2-3 over his last 5 fights, successfully snapped a 3-fight losing streak last time around where he picked up a split decision victory over Mitch Raposo. I thought it was clear that after that first round that Sumudaerji was in control. Even some of the takedowns and control that Raposo was able to get didn't really land much damage with it, which ended up leading to Sumudaerji being the one that was more damage centric, and which is why 2 of the judges scored that fight in his favor. But, you can't really blame Raposo for trying to go to the grappling game because that's where past opponents have gotten the better of Sumudaerji. Whether it was that slobber knocker that he had against Matt Schnell, which ended up on the ground and allowing Schnell to get that submission, or Tim Elliott taking him to the ground and getting the submission there. Charles Johhson mixing in some grappling as well on top of his volume-heavy striking approach. They were all able to get the better of Sumudaerji. But what Raposo was missing was landing damage while he was looking for those takedowns and getting that control time. And that's where Sumudaerji was able to pull away. But at his best, Sumudaerji is a fighter that picks opponents apart from distance, has some good pop on his shots, has some decent knockout power as well, throws in great combinations, very good leg kicks as well. I think he mixed it up at Team Alpha Male for a while, but I think in preparation for this matchup, he mainly stayed at the UFC PI. He's 29 years old still, so given the right matchups, this is a guy that could break into the flyweight rankings and maybe find himself in title contention one day. But as long as the UFC doesn't give him heavy grapplers that he needs to go up against, it's really about the striking for him. Just as it is for Kevin Borjas, who pulled off a solid upset last time around against Ronaldo Rodriguez, the guy's Mexican. No H's for R's. Come on, man, get it together. But great performance from Borjas. He did a good job in terms of countering the aggressive approach for Rodriguez. He wasn't throwing all that often, but when he did, he surely made it count. He was landing those counters with speed, with effectiveness, really taking advantage of the poor striking defense of Rodriguez. And I think that's Borjas at his best. When he can get into his Muay Thai groove of just throwing some combinations, countering effectively, utilizing his speed as best as he could, that's when he is best. Guys in the past who have taken advantage of him often look to take him to the ground. He's rounding out that game as best as he can to try to keep fights in the striking realm. But losses to Joshua Van and Alessandro Costa kind of give you the ceiling of where Borjas might go. He's only 27 years old, so I don't want to say this is a guy that can find himself in title contention. But this weekend, he has a tough opponent to go against and a guy that I think that has near Joshua Van / Alessandro Costa levels of striking that he could get the better of Borjas. He just needs to be careful, or I should say Sumudaerji just needs to be careful of the counters and the speed of Borjas. But I think if Sumudaerji can implement that 4-inch reach advantage, that 3-inch height advantage, stick at distance, keep Borjas at the end of his jab, keep him at the end of his range, he should be able to pick him apart, and I think he ends up winning this fight on the scorecards. It might be fight of the night as well, considering how these guys throw down, but I do like Sumudaerji a good bit here, and I think he can really showcase his best work against Borjas in this fight. All right, next up, heavyweights throwing down as we have Sergey Pavlovich coming in at minus 225, going up against the streaking Waldo Cortes-Acosta, who currently comes in at plus 190. Now, starting off on the Pavlovich side of things, he was able to bounce back from that 2-fight losing streak he had. One at the hands of Tom Aspinall, who knocked him out in less than 70 seconds. That was for the interim title, if you guys remember. And then he fell short against Alexander Volkov, looking only to land his big power to try to knock Volkov out, while Volkov kind of just stayed at range and picked him apart with volume and output and won that fight on the scorecards. But we saw a little bit more of a conservative version of Pavlovich last time around against Rozenstruik, at least in the fact that he's not just going out there and seeking these quick knockouts. He was letting his punches come to him. He was letting the volume come when it came, and he was able to hurt and drop Rozenstruik a few times, and it seemed like he just utilized the last half of the round to grind Rozenstruik out on the mat, but a lot of that came from his striking being so successful, which was surprising because on paper, Rozenstruik was a better technical striker, but Pavlovich threw that all out the window by being a little bit more disciplined, a little bit more methodical, throwing in combinations and landing that big power last rather than just headhunting from jump like he did against Volkov. I think that was a great learning lesson for Pavlovich, and I think we'll continue to see a better version of him as he works through his next couple of fights, but he's going to have to halt a steam train or the steaming and rolling Waldo Cortes-Acosta, who's currently on a 5-fight winning streak, most recently picking up a big win over Sergey Spivak last time around. Now, that was a fight that the betting community was kind of split. You had a lot of people on the grappling side of things with Spivak, including myself, and then a lot of people on the striker side of things thinking that Cortes-Acosta had improved his grappling enough that he could force Spivak to strike with him for the most part, and he did. I think he shucked off 4 of the 6 takedown attempts from Spivak, and even when he did get taken down, he quickly worked back to his feet. And then from there, obviously, Cortes-Acosta has a striking advantage over Spivak, and he touched him up over 50 minutes and won that fight easily on the scorecards. At his best, Cortes-Acosta utilizes good movement, a stinging jab, a consistent jab, a pesky jab, I like to call it, because he just throws it out there so often. And then when he sees the timing and the moments, he lets go with that cross down the pipe to try to land some power as well. He has good movement, good footwork, and good cardio for a guy his size. But this weekend, I think will really tell us whether he has what it takes to try to get into title contention, or if he's just going to be that, just outside of the top 5 heavyweight or out of the top 7 heavyweight if he can overcome Pavlovich here. And going into researching this matchup, I really expected to be on the Cortes-Acosta side, but I almost completely forgot about the Rozenstruik fight for Pavlovich and how impressed I was with him in that matchup. Here against Cortes-Acosta, maybe Cortes-Acosta stays on his bicycle, just jabs away at distance, sticks a move, doesn't really engage too much, and that's how he's able to get the win here. But I think that we'll see Pavlovich kind of time those entries on Cortes-Acosta, land those combinations, land his bigger power, and either that knocks out Cortes-Acosta or that consistently drops him, or Pavlovich mixes in the takedowns behind that striking, catches Cortes-Acosta off guard, and he might be able to get some top time off of that. So many ways this fight could go, so it's tough to really build that big confidence on Pavlovich here because Cortes-Acosta has such a tricky striking game to deal with. But if we see the methodical approach from him, just as we saw against Rozenstruik, we could see Pavlovich have success in the striking realm, landing big shots of his own and mixing in the grappling behind it. So the official prediction is going to go with the Russian here. I think Pavlovich mixes the game well enough, trusts in his striking from a solid process approach, and that should be able to overcome the jab heavy style of Cortes-Acosta. But minus 225, a little bit wide to fade somebody that's on a hot streak like Cortes-Acosta. If this line starts to come down on Pavlovich, I would consider it, but at minus 225, I'd probably just pass. The over 1.5 at minus 155 is also intriguing, considering how Cortes-Acosta fights. But I'm going to take Pavlovich and Pavlovich to win this fight on the scorecards. All right, next up, the first of 2 5-round matchups that we have at the top of the card here in the co-main event. It is in the featherweight division, as we have Brian Ortega coming in at plus 210, going up against former bantamweight champion Aljamain Sterling, who comes in at minus 245. Now, starting off on the Ortega side of things, who's coming off of a tough loss to Diego Lopez from Noche UFC last year. We know what Ortega's game is, right? He's 1-3 in his last 4 fights. There are certain guys that he can't defeat. Obviously, had that shoulder injury against Yair Rodriguez. Nearly got finished in the first round of the rematch, but Rodriguez seemingly emptied his gas tank in that first round and allowed Ortega to take over in the next 2 rounds and eventually sink in that submission in that 3rd round to get the win. But that's Ortega's style. Either he gets that submission early, he can also get it late as well, but if he can't get fights into the jiu-jitsu game, he's often in a lot of trouble. I know a lot of people like to point back at that Chan Sung Jung fight in terms of the striking improvements that we've seen in Ortega's game, but I have it on good record that Chan Sung Jung, I think he was on skates after that first or second round and really just was not with it, was not himself at all, allowing Ortega to kind of dictate the pace of that matchup. But I think we've seen in recent fights, obviously against Volkanovski and Diego Lopez, that, that's where Ortega really struggles. And, being nearly finished numerous times by both of those guys in the striking realm kind of goes to show where Ortega is. This is a very weird matchup for him to take against Sterling. A tough fight. Like one that, we know Aljamain Sterling, which I'll jump onto his side right now, very high-level grappler, very pesky, smothering grappler. Does a great job in terms of getting the back of his opponents and just kind of keeping them there or finding that choke eventually. He's 1-3 over his last 1-2 over his last 3 fights. The first loss, obviously, the title loss to Sean O'Malley back in August of 2023, I think it was. Then he bounced back in April of 2024 at UFC 300 by smothering Calvin Kattar or Cater and defeating him on the scorecards. He had a very solid start in December against Movsar Evloev, winning that first round, I believe, on all 3 scorecards, but was unable to have success in the second and third rounds as Evloev scrambled enough, got out of those bad positions, and really wore down Aljamain Sterling. But Sterling utilizes a flashy striking game, a lot of kicks to eventually set up a takedown or at least clinch initiation so that he can jump on the back of his opponents and just grind them out from there. And I think he's slowly acclimating to the 145-pound division. It's going to be tough for him to get the better of guys like Evloev, but in this matchup against Ortega, I'd be very surprised if he ends up getting caught in a submission or even getting caught with a big shot from Ortega. I think Sterling finds his positions here. I think he chips away at Ortega from distance with his kicks, gets those safe entries into the takedowns and clinch position against Ortega, and I think he stays safe enough to just make this a very boring 5-round fight where we see Sterling win this fight on the scorecards, and I feel pretty good about it. Ortega is dangerous. He's a very good submission specialist, but Sterling is very safe on the mat, never really puts himself in too much danger, and I think Ortega is going to struggle to have that success here against Sterling. So give me Sterling by decision, and I think he ends up looking like the chalk that he is. All right. Light heavyweight headliner here now for this UFC Shanghai card, where we got Johnny Walker coming in at plus 250, going up against Mingyang Zhang, or Zhang Mingyang, however you want to say it, coming in at minus 310. Now, start off on the Johnny Walker side of things, who's on a 2-fight losing streak. Both of those losses coming by knockout, first to Magomed Ankalaev, who we obviously know eventually goes on to become the light heavyweight champion. And then the last one to Volkan Oezdemir last year, where he got walked down that entire time and just absolutely dummied and then finished in comical fashion, just as it often seems for him. This is a guy that came into a solid position while riding a 9-fight winning streak coming into the UFC, or at least 3 of those coming in the UFC, going into that Corey Anderson fight, and then he got knocked out bad in that fight. And including that fight, he's 4-6, and he's been finished in brutal fashion in 4 of those 6 losses as well. For a guy that relies so heavily on a flashy power striking style, his durability just does not allow him to move as freely or as confidently as he used to, which has really muzzled his approach against a lot of his opponents. Sure, he might land a big shot here or there, and it might be able to pull out a Hail Mary knockout from time to time, but seeing that he's 33 years old, seeing that he's taking the time off that he needs between these knockouts, but still going out there and getting knocked out, is just not a good look. And now he's going up against a guy that's riding a 12-fight winning streak and has been finishing all 19 of his wins in the first round. It's not a good look for Johnny Walker. Why he's taking this matchup makes no sense to me. So let's quickly talk about Zhang Mingyang, who is now 3-0 in the UFC, 12-fight winning streak, like I said. Last time around, sending Anthony Smith to retirement in bloody fashion, absolutely torching him with elbows up against the cage. Then once he got him to the ground, landing even more elbows from there. Mingyang is just nasty with his striking, with his aggression, with his power. He's very good in terms of smelling blood in the water and just jumping on it and getting his opponents out of there quickly. This is a guy that does have 6 losses on his record, so let's not overlook that, right? He even has a loss to that guy, Askar Mozarov, if you guys remember, who fought Alonzo Menefield a couple years back, who ended up getting cut after they found out that he had a very fake record, changing names or something like that, and just faking his record, faking fights as well. So like he was put out by that guy back in the day, and surely he's better than that now. So I completely understand if you don't want to take that into too much consideration. He's also 27 now, so he's definitely better. But there are going to be certain fighters that can take advantage of some of the issues in his game. I just don't think Johnny Walker is that guy. I think we'll see Ming Yang just get to his game, get to that pace, get to that pressure, land those big shots on Walker, and I think he gets Walker out of there in that first round. Now, something to note, the under 1.5, the last time I saw was minus 295, which makes sense, right? All 19 of Ming Yang's wins coming in the first round. It makes sense why the odds are like that. But his round 1 prop is plus 115. His round 1 KO prop is plus 135. So I think I'd feel safer taking that rather than the chalk. Maybe Walker's able to be a little bit more effective should this get into deeper water. But I think for Ming Yang to look that minus 300, it's going to come with him getting his usual first round finish. I would rather take the round 1 plus 15 than rather the round 1 KO at plus 135, as I don't think there's enough of a trade-off there to warrant, taking the extra chalk for a more specific finish. What if he gets the club and sub, right? What if he hurts Walker? Walker goes in for a takedown attempt, gives up his neck, and Ming Yang goes on for a guillotine and puts him out that way. So I'd rather take the round 1 plus 115. I think he walks him down. I think he finishes Walker pretty easily here. But again, do not overlook the danger that Walker provides with his power, his explosivity. Maybe he just says fuck it and just lets it slang, and he ends up landing a big one on Zhang and puts Zhang away. So don't put all your eggs in the Chinese basket here. But I do think that Zhang Mingyang finds that knockout, and I think it happens in the first round. There you guys go. Full card UFC Shanghai breakdown. Happy to get it out for you guys on this Monday. I know it's getting close to midnight here, so it's almost Tuesday, but I'm still getting this out on Monday for you guys so I can stick to the usual release schedule for the week. Appreciate the love. Appreciate the support. Again, hit that subscribe if you haven't already. I'm on my road to 10,000 subscribers, almost getting there. Yeah. And then we got Contender Series on Tuesday. So got a few plays that I'm going to be dropping for that. Check that on the MMALOTN Patreon page. Otherwise, I'll see you guys again on Tuesday for the top 3 Lock of the Night candidates. And I'll see if I can get the PFL breakdowns for you guys. Otherwise, that will come out on Wednesday. All right. I'm done jabbering. I could go on for ages. Appreciate the love. Appreciate the support. See you guys tomorrow. Peace.
Last thing.